Thank you, Rick. So I do have a couple questions, but please, everyone, send me more questions in the chat. You can do so by clicking on the chat button and selecting the host. So the first question is from Brenda, and she asked, this was kind of earlier in the presentation, so it's not as related to the topic at hand, but how do you have the opportunity to work with more high school teachers, and how can other high school teachers be involved?
Great question. So how can you get involved? Specifically in my research group, we have things like teacher workshops where we've brought teachers in for a week to learn about some topic. Sometimes it's ecology, sometimes it's toxicology, sometimes it's evolution. It's all sorts of different topics. And from there, we'll often find someone who's really passionate about learning how to do the science sort of in a large way, be a part of a research lab. There are NSF, National Science Foundation programs. It's called the RET program that we use. And that means Research Experience for Teachers. And we've brought in, I think now, 6 teachers over 6 summers. Each one of them has worked with us, worked, at the level of one of my senior graduate students. And we really challenge them to do cutting-edge science, and I'm really proud to say that each one of them has co-authored a paper, and some of those papers have been really big papers in really important places that we published them. And in that particular program, just so you all know, if you haven't experienced it, the National Science Foundation gives the teacher a stipend of about $10,000 to work for those 8 or 10 weeks. I think it's about 10 weeks, depending on the teacher's summer schedule. But that's how we've done it. There are a lot of different programs. Not every environmental science faculty has a research group that does that, but that's how we've done it in the past, and there are certainly faculty around you that are probably doing that too at different universities, wherever you may be. But that's how we've done it. We've been really pleased. We look back and we think about how many teachers we've helped in various ways, the workshops as well as having them in our lab. But when we go into those classrooms, it is just amazing to me how much they have challenged their students compared to before we worked together. That is, how they challenge them to do experiments where they don't know the answer. I went into one classroom in Greenville, Pennsylvania, and the students brought me around to the 4 different pesticide experiments they're doing, and each one was large. I mean, each one had like 10 different manipulations, and they could explain about why they were doing it, what the science was, and I was so darn impressed. And I just thought, it's because this teacher spent the summer with us that he got a sense of how much more his students could be doing once he had a grasp of how the science was done as well. So all I can tell you is contact people and express the passion that you have, because it's the passion that will get you really far in this.
Thank you. Follow-up question to that is, what RET group is it? I know Notre Dame has a program. Are there any others?
Yeah, there are lots of them, and lots of them aren't necessarily advertised. For example, our program was small. We had 1 teacher each year come in, so we knew from learning the teacher network in our area, working with our university outreach folks who worked with probably 100 different high schools around Western Pennsylvania at the time, and other faculty did it the same way. So it was not like broadly advertised, but if you are involved or can get involved with the universities, they probably have people in biology or environmental sciences, one of those departments, who are the outreach person. They would be the person to start with, because they know all the faculty and who's doing RETs and who's not. So these are supplemental grants. If a professor has an NSF grant, they can apply for this supplement, and that's how we get them. So there isn't sort of a central RET program, unfortunately. It's really professor by professor.
Thank you. We got a couple more questions. The next one comes from Sarah. And I apologize in advance. I have a degree in English, and I am not great at pronouncing scientific terms. So apologies. From Sarah, do we need to worry about lead poisoning through biomagnification, specifically plants that use fresh water to cool the plant or for other uses, then put that water back into the ecosystem? Many of these plants are not necessarily updating their lead pipes to current standards either. What concerns do we have for wildlife and up the food chain?
Yeah, so lead is one of those things we do have to worry about because it does get stored. I mean, you have to worry about things that biomagnify when they get stored in the animal fats, and as I recall, lead does do that. You certainly have to worry about anybody that has lead pipes if they're not coated or if they're not lined. So there are places that have lead pipes that, for example, have a tin lining inside the lead pipe so the water never touches the lead. As a way to kind of retrofit these pipes. So it really depends on if you're talking about like a water treatment plant, what they've done. But, you know, lead is absolutely something that people need to worry about because the biggest reason is it is harmful at incredibly low doses. So as the CDC has said, there is no safe amount. So, you know, the lowest dose is still not safe. But anyone should be able to have their water tested. And it doesn't cost that much. You know, when we bought a house here, we had the water tested for about 20 different things, which is just always a good idea when you buy a house. And every once in a while to redo it, retest it. Probably for less than $100, you could have 15 or 20 different tests on everything from coliform bacteria to make sure there's no sewage leaking into your water system to lead and arsenic and other things. So those are fairly easy to test. There's lots of labs around the country that do it, probably pretty locally, to find out what's in the water. But just having lead pipes alone, it really depends on what they're doing. As Troy did, you know, they added a chemical to really reduce any leaching of lead, and it seems to be that it was pretty effective.
Thank you. Our next question is from Tom. I'll definitely mispronounce something here. Are orthophosphates reactive and or do the present other environmental problems themselves? And are there other additives besides orthophosphates that can be added to systems to protect drinking water supplies?
Great question, Tom. I don't know of any harmful effects of orthophosphate, but I'm absolutely not an expert on orthophosphate. So I'm going to defer and say I just don't know of any, but that doesn't mean there aren't any. I believe there are other additives, but again, that's not my area, but that seems to be a common additive to protect against lead pipes. You know, I know much more about things like pesticides in water and what that does and some other things, some hormones, et cetera, but I don't know enough about water treatment plants and whether they go with other aspects, but I bet, you know, you can Google that pretty quick and find out if there are any concerns about orthophosphates, but I just simply don't know.
Thank you. Do you know of any other case studies involving lead poisoning through water where long-term effects on people were documented? And this is from Michael. And maybe we can extend this question to, you said, pesticides and other things in the water as well.
Yeah, you know, the lead in the water, I mean, there's a long body of research that shows the cases that I've talked about. It goes back 100 years in terms of what the impacts are on people. We see the same thing with arsenic. We just see the same thing, you know, some of the scariest kind of impacts from a wildlife point of view we see with hormones in the water. So like the Chesapeake Bay currently, I think 3/4 of the smallmouth bass are now, that should be male, are hermaphrodites, so they have eggs growing inside their testes. I mean, there's just some scary outcomes going on with things in water. So lead is certainly one of them. But other things like hormones and pesticides, steroids, those kind of things, so many of those also can be really harmful at really low concentrations. So I hate to sort of be depressing, but we do have to worry about all of these things because we now know what we didn't even 10 years ago about some of these things. We knew about lead for a long time, but in terms of some of these other things like, estrogen coming from birth control pills that get to the water supply, like the Chesapeake Bay, it's amazing if you think about, how little must get into rivers and streams and then go out into a bay, how dilute that must be, and still it makes male fish hermaphrodites. That's a really low concentration. And it's not the only place it's happening, but it's one of the sort of great case studies. In fact, we talk about that in the book of what an alarming outcome that is, that, there's a bunch of fish that can't even reproduce because they're half female.